Hello, and thanks for joining me for another edition of Face the Facts. I'm your host, April Moss. Today, we're going to be speaking with attorney Mike Yoder. He's joined the show before, but this time he brings more information to us about the loopholes that he's trying to work through to be able to sue Big Pharma. It's an episode you won't want to miss. Plus, he gives his candid take on society, culture, and what Americans can do about it. Join me for a great edition with Mike Yoder. Before we get into this interview, I'd like to just say we need your help to continue growing. Please consider making a donation or shopping at one of our affiliates. Today's episode is sponsored by none other than Mike Lindell himself, mypillow.com. When you use promo code April at the checkout, you will ensure that Face the Facts continues to stay on Real America's Voice, Rumble, and podcast platforms. If you're watching on Rumble, take a quick moment and hit that plus sign. Make sure you're subscribed and please share this episode. Again, shop at mypillow.com. Use promo code April at the checkout. You'll save up to 66% off and get high quality products shipped right to your door. Quality products made in America. Keep your money here in this country. Don't ship it overseas. Shop mypillow.com. Use promo code April. Mike, thanks so much for joining us on Face the Facts. It's great to see you again. Saw you just a few weeks ago in Phoenix, Arizona at the Turning Point America Fest.
I'm glad to be back. It's been a wild end of 2022 and Happy New Year, starting 2023 off.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you. And thank you so much for taking up the cause of so many Americans that many other lawyers won't take up. And the case I really wanted you to explain to everybody is the current lawsuit against Duke University. Tell us a little bit about that case and what that entails and why is it important for people to know about it?
So, I mean, from a high level, the importance that applies to everyone across the board about this case is that your medical choice should not be leveraged or weaponized against you to be able to obtain healthcare in this country. And this case is about a 14-year-old girl, Yulia Hicks, who suffers from a significant kidney disorder. She's in stage 5 kidney failure, and she's been treating at Duke with her lovely family. They have adopted her in 2019. Or she began treating in 2019. They were able to formalize the adoption in 2021 and have been doing at-home dialysis ever since. And her kidney functioning is well below 20%. I mean, it's very, very bad. It's obviously fatal without the surgery. And Duke, after treating her for over 2 years, decided that they were going to decide to withhold the ability of her to actually obtain the transplant because of her being Catholic. And it was veiled under the guise of her being unvaccinated, despite having a effective lifelong history of not only just Yulia, but the entire Hicks family, who are devout Catholics, of abstaining from inoculation with vaccines due to their sincerely held religious beliefs. And there's a lot of issue in this country surrounding what laws and anti-discrimination protections apply, depending on the relationship between the discriminating entity or the party and the individual that is suffering the discrimination. But here, because we're so accustomed to dealing with Title VII, which is typically employment-related claims, this is a patient-physician or patient-hospital relationship where she's not an employee and it's also a private entity. So what it is, though, is a public place of accommodation, and that's under Title II of the Civil Rights Act. So under that same veil, you cannot withhold or discriminate in the provision of services based on someone's sincerely held religious beliefs. And that's exactly what Duke is doing. In fact, 10 days after they decided that Yulia would not be activated on the transplant list, they performed a kidney transplant surgery on another gentleman who was not vaccinated, but he wasn't Catholic. And he was able to get his kidney just 10 days after they decided not to allow Yulia to get hers when she is Catholic.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And actually, while we're talking on this subject, what about all of the companies and organizations or corporations who mandated vaccines at the start of the vaccine rollout? They mandated them, or else you were going to lose your job, and they would not accept a religious or medical exemption. A lot of these companies have legal protection so that you can't do anything about it. You're just going to lose your job. Do you foresee any way that anybody could get around that? Or tell us a little bit about your knowledge on what people can do about that.
Yeah, and I filed a good number of suits against employers who terminated individuals after they submitted a religious accommodation request and it was denied. And what the media did surreptitiously throughout the pandemic is they started putting in this term exemption, this religious exemption or medical exemption. And in reality, there's no law, state or federal, to my knowledge, state-wise at least, that there's no federal law that entitles someone to an exemption. You're entitled to an accommodation based on sincerely held religious beliefs or based on disability as to a company policy or something that's rolled out in that regard. And here, the exemption was used surreptitiously because when you seek a religious exemption, well, you're not entitled to one, so they don't even review it, but you're entitled to a religious accommodation. So the word exempt is being placed as to the policy. And it means that if you're exempt from a policy, you kind of fly above that entire policy, whereas you're still subject to the policy, but accommodated, being that the accommodation is being exempt from inoculation, not the policy. The accommodation is, okay, in lieu of vaccination, I'll mitigate the spread of COVID-19 through social distancing, masking, weekly testing, things of that nature. And that's where the biggest pitfall was. The second problem is that they just didn't care. I mean, we've seen this historically where Yale was found to be discriminating against, I believe it was white and Asian students in their application process, and they didn't care. They openly were essentially admitting that in the court pleadings. And that's a big problem when you're knowingly and openly violating law. And I'm not saying Yale continues to do that. This was a while ago, but that's, what was alleged in the pleadings. And it was a very weak defense, in my opinion, as to anything that they said against that. And the problem is that when our culture is dictating what should be the controlling course of conduct over what the law says, that leads to a lawless society. And the rule of law is effectively the last thing that we have, second to the Supreme Court, which is the application of that rule of law to abject tyranny. And we've seen that just progress at rapid rates since the Biden administration took over. So anyone that was terminated because their religious accommodation was denied, the only basis you can deny that is if it's a insincere, meaning that you don't sincerely believe what your asserted religious belief is, or secondly, even if you do sincerely believe that it would impose an undue hardship on your employer. And the question of fact is, does it really? Does it really impose undue hardship on an employer? So that's what the litigation is mainly surrounding right now.
I know I talk with people all the time who have lost loved ones in the hospital. There's now a new group of lawyers that I'm in contact with that are seeking to hold some of these hospital systems accountable for the lack of informed consent in the use of remdesivir. But so many other people say, listen, my mom or my dad or my wife, my brother were killed in the hospitals under, being given remdesivir or other drugs that ultimately led to their death. What do we do about it? And I know there's been legally a huge challenge because lawyers can't just outright sue pharmaceutical companies because of what happened through the act that Reagan signed back in the 80s. But can you tell me a little bit about some of the new things that you're learning and discovering in your research process regarding this topic?
Yeah, so I'm looking mainly at the PrEP Act. The largest, chunk of that came out in 2010 were some serious Code of Federal Regulations, which are just agency rules promulgated under the Health and Human Services Division. And what we really see with this is that this law that they claim to be a blanket immunity shield really isn't. It has a provision specifically within that statute that says, quote, this statute creates an exclusive federal cause of action for death or serious bodily injury. So I knew that there had to be elements to the statute, but the equivalent of understanding this would really be taking a page out of a book and cutting out each individual word, throwing it in a Ziploc bag, shaking it up, and trying to put them back in order. It's there, and it's easy to do if you know where each piece goes. But for someone that's looking at this and doesn't know where things are hidden, it's like a game of Where's Waldo trying to piece these elements together. And they refer to pursuant to the subsection above or notwithstanding subsection EF, GH. That it's all construed like that. So it takes a long time to untangle. It took me about 9 months to really get the full, strong understanding of the statute. And it's pretty straightforward once you actually unravel it, where you need to go through the administrative remedies process first, which is filing a claim with the CICP, the Countermeasures Injury Compensation Program. You have to file that as it stands right now within 1 year of the date that the countermeasure was administered. And when I say countermeasure, that could be anything that was used to help mitigate the effects of a state of emergency under the HHS declaration. So ivermectin suppression. It doesn't have to be something affirmatively given to you, but they suppressed ivermectin, or the prescription or giving to patients remdesivir, putting them on ventilators unnecessarily, the vaccines themselves causing fatalities or injuries of that sort. So all of these things can be brought, and it's a wide spectrum of defendants that are subject to it. So the main entities that I want to pursue against first are the hospitals and the employers. And then I want to go back into looking at the media companies for pushing this narrative and for promulgating this as the mouth that was advertising it. And then finally, I do want to get to Big Pharma on this, because they knew what these vaccines did. They concealed the evidence. They pushed the narrative. And the question that really is salient with the PrEP Act case, it boils down to putting it in front of a jury and asking whether they acted with the intent to achieve a wrongful purpose. And my argument is that they never promulgated these vaccines with the intent to further benefit someone's health. Why? Because they never even tested to see if they worked. What they did, though, was they laid the framework for a mass global vaccination platform where you can effectively, at the drop of a hat, declare a state of emergency, and you have the framework and you have the pipelines and you have the blueprint and the logistics laid out to mass vaccinate, use taxpayer dollars under federal grants or subsidies to pay the big pharma entities for these vaccines. And then all of a sudden, wow, they look at that. They donate right back to the PACs of the elected officials who pushed this through in the first place. It was never about health. It never mitigated the spread. I've seen articles ranging from 100% effective down to, I believe, 12% effective. And the real documentation shows that they were about 17 to 18% effective for up to 85 days. They never worked.
And they isn't there the other thing about it being a emergency use authorization? You can only get that if there's no other treatments available, and so they suppress the ivermectin and the hydroxychloroquine.
Well, naturally, one would be able to logically deduce that a statute such as the EUA, the Emergency Use Authorization, that prohibits the FDA from approving a drug, or in the inverse of that, which is they cannot coexist, because if there is FDA approval, then you cannot have an EUA. The Emergency Use Authorization, and I misspoke, it does not preclude the FDA from approving, but you can't have them contemporaneously or coexist. It's either you have EUA solely because there is no FDA approved drug, or if there is an FDA approved drug, then the EUA can no longer exist. And most people don't even know there's two different Pfizer vaccines. There's Pfizer BioNTech and there's Pfizer Comirnaty. And the Pfizer Comirnaty is, I describe it like a concept car at a car show. There's this futuristic looking Mercedes-Benz right in front of you. You can see it. You can touch it. It's a real car. It's right there. But no one has it. No one can buy it. Nobody owns it. You don't know if they're ever going to produce it. You don't know where it's located. You don't know anything about it. They don't release the specs on it. But there's a car just sitting right there. Like, oh, this is approved for the road. So just because of the existence of that one car does not mean that you can all of a sudden substitute. Imagine going online and saying, here, I'm buying this car, and then they ship you an S-Class. I'm not going to complain about that for a car, but that's not what you signed up for. And you don't know what you're getting. And you never even knew what was in that one to begin with. But this all falls under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which exclusively is reserved for government entities to prosecute. And this is up to Merrick Garland to do his job, which, that's not going to happen.
And, I want to bring up this other thing. I've talked about it before on my show, but it's been quite a while. In 2021, in July of 2021, the hospital system of Henry Ford in Michigan, Dearborn, Michigan, did a test, if you will, on COVID patients. And this was when they, 2020, July 2020. And they tested the use of hydroxychloroquine on COVID patients, on 900 patients. Out of those 900 who were given hydroxychloroquine, all of them, their lives were spared. They survived. Not one died. They published that finding, the hospital did. 30 days later, the FDA came out and said no hospitals are to give hydroxychloroquine for COVID patients. So that right there alone, they did the study. Detroit was hit, one of the hardest hit cities for COVID. And they did the study in that city at that huge hospital system. And then the FDA completely ignored the findings where it saved the lives of 900 people. I mean, this to me is so egregious. It's a topic I've really don't want to let go on because I think so many people are still, they need to see justice done. They lost their husbands, they lost their wives, they lost their moms and dads over this last year because of the suppression of real treatments that were available, that were successful, that were tested in trials. Look at India. Those people, the government gave them ivermectin and COVID was eliminated almost immediately. And what did they do here in America? They suppressed those healing medicines and only pushed. And again, I'm glad you're going to go after the media on this. Is one of the reasons why I left CBS Detroit was because they were only pushing out the propaganda that the vaccine was the only way to stay healthy and be safe and pushing fear upon everybody. So they should be held accountable.
I agree. And I mean, if you look at the population, and I'm not going to go into the specific numbers, but you can look this up. If you look at the total population that Americans account for in the world, very de minimis. Yet we account for 65% of all pharmaceuticals prescribed and utilized. It boils down to something that's just very simple and hard for people to grasp because of how repulsive and vile it is. But ivermectin is a lot cheaper. That's really what it is. Ivermectin is effective, but it's cheaper. The prices on the vaccines are through the roof. They can artificially inflate them. And if you want to take a look at it from a business standpoint, absent morals, absent any sort of doing the right thing, which a lot of, I think truly the vast majority of society does intend to do the right thing and they are good people. They just, some have different levels of knowledge and that's neither here nor there for what I'm trying to articulate. But the problem is that if you look at what they're doing, you cannot conceivably think of a better business model because the supply is effectively unlimited because you can manufacture it in a lab. The demand is, well, even if it's not demanded, meaning wanted, it's pushed as a necessity and you're forced to do it. Otherwise you lose your job and there's repercussions for not partaking in it. And that's globally. So that's 8 billion people worldwide. And then the financing behind it is taxpayer dollars where the government takes money that American citizens or other nations and their citizens earn, and it gets dumped back into the pharmaceutical industrial complex. We used to prioritize the military industrial complex until Biden destroyed effectively any progress that was made over 20 years. And frankly, I don't even think that we should have been there to begin with, teaching other countries how to build a government. But the fact is that we shifted out of the military industrial complex into the pharmaceutical industrial complex. This is the framework for them to just route money right into the belly of the beast, which is big pharma. It's working together with the federal government, and they never once prioritized human health, and they committed atrocities. Over 6 million people died who could have been spared had they had been given ivermectin. Statistically, it's proven in multiple studies, which is effectively like carrying out, it correlates to imagine the Holocaust taking place right beneath your eyes and right under your nose. And you not only acting out against people that don't want these vaccines that don't work, but you don't even realize it. I mean, it's the Holocaust was the one, in my opinion, the greatest human atrocity that I can truly think of.
Absolutely.
And the fact is that 6 million people globally died because of what the government was pushing here. And people can't believe it because of, I would say probably shame would be a number one factor, but cognitive bias. They can't believe that there would be something so repulsive as an agenda like this. And it's, I look at it with the silver lining because you frankly have to with how dark and morbid this is, but they genuinely want there to be good people. They thought they were helping. That's how this got carried out. And when you're so wrong about something of such great magnitude, and it was such an emotional struggle where you're screaming in grocery stores about people wearing masks or not seeing family because of the vaccine, you got played. And it's so hard to reconcile that. And that's why we continually see this narrative of the anti-vaxxer and all this agenda, because they're the workhorses. There's evil people that exist, but not enough of them to carry this out. It's the everyday, average, hardworking American person that thinks that they're saving their neighbor and grandma that followed blindly and did not critically think or ask questions as to why am I doing this? Should I do this? Is it safe? Or those who even feared getting the vaccine, but caved because they were weak. That is what carried this agenda out, and that's why we are where we are.
Well, and then let's just say this. On Monday of this week, you have the Buffalo Bills player dropping down. We thought, he obviously was rushed to the hospital. He's still in the hospital right now. And the question that all of the people who have been aware of the dangerous side effects of the jab for this entire time have been asking is, oh, hey, was he jabbed? Right? It's a question. But even asking that question, so many people were offended by that. And how dare you ask that question? Well, we have to ask that question. We have to keep talking about this when athletes are suddenly dropping down, having cardiac arrests and strokes, and young people, healthy people in the prime of their life, having these suddenly moments where they're down on the ground, whether they die or whether they, end up needing further medical assistance afterwards. I mean, it's still too soon to know the details surrounding what happened Monday night. However, I have to say, I think we have to keep this dialogue going so that we can continue to explore what we're looking at here and reaching the people in the middle who were duped into getting this shot and still might even put some trust in the pharmaceutical industry, but they're not quite ready to jump onto the bandwagon of people who said, see, we tried to warn you, but you guys wouldn't listen.
Groupthink is dangerous and facts don't care about feelings. The fact that we are pushing such a coddling agenda, whereas if someone thinks something or something makes someone feel a certain way, how dare you seek veracity and how dare you prioritize truth over someone else's feelings? And I'm here to say I'll do it every day because truth is the fundamental core of what matters. And it's okay to be wrong. I misspoke during this segment and I just went back and corrected myself. It's not a difficult thing to do to acknowledge what is true and want to seek that out. The problem is that we're so curtailed into being championed for individuality and be whatever you want to be and do whatever you want to do. And it just destroys any sort of norm or social construct or any social order. And that is what leads to the degradation of society to the point where you are more likely, or at least a year ago before Elon took over, you would be more likely to be kicked off of Twitter because you opposed child pornography than if you posted it. And even after reporting a 15-year-old boy that was exploited was posted on Twitter, they found it didn't violate their terms and conditions. But when I mentioned that Susan Rosenberg, in 1983 planted a bomb outside of U.S. Senate chambers in an attempt to assassinate Republican senators, and on the last day of Clinton's presidency, Nadler got Clinton to issue a pardon, and now she's on the board of directors for Black Lives Matter Network, Inc. That got me suspended. Now, I'm not sure which one is more offensive, and I genuinely say that because I don't know whether we measure something being offensive from an objective point of view as to would a reasonable or rational person be incensed or offended by such a statement, or whether we are now considering the vast majority of people who are weak and subjectively review what's sensitive, whether that becomes the norm. And that's the danger with societal norms and statutes, and the Supreme Court precedent often changes based on what is acceptable socially. That's where Lawrence v. Texas, you look at those different cases, Obergefell, all of these different cases. I mean, these were things that Thomas talked about in his dissent in the Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade, where you run into social construct being a heavily weighed factor in Supreme Court precedent with a progressive society. And I don't say progressive in the sense of what we, colloquially refer to. Society should progress in a positive manner, not regress negatively and veil it under this guise. So I think that this is a very important narrative. I can't opine as to whether the vaccine was the result of what happened on that field. But I mean, and I say that because he got hit, right? He wasn't just standing there. There was a hit. I'm not ruling it out by any means. And my gut is telling me that I think that it was the vaccine. And if you look at the statistics of Olympians, if you look at the number of Olympians under the age of 35 from 1965 through May of 2022, it is almost identical to the same number of fatalities as the number of Olympians in the same demographic from May 2021 to May 2022. Now, these are the healthiest specimens of the human effective the human society, human race, it is literally the most advanced bodies physiologically, and that many of them died between 1 year. The only thing that changed was the vaccine.
Yep.
And the sequela that was related to it, perhaps, lower effectiveness of immune systems because of the masking and staying at home, and you're not getting that. That's why they tell kids to play in the dirt, build your immune system, things like that.
Mhm.
But that number is staggering. 1965 to 2021, or excuse me, 1965 to 2022. 1 year versus a span of what, 55?
Yeah. Well,
It's
it's just
incredible.
like when you look at the VAERS data and you see that, there are more adverse reactions from just the COVID jab than in all of the vaccines from 30 years prior, when we began to start to really look at adverse reactions for vaccines and start the reporting system. Clearly this is something that has impacted society in such a way. And the fact that the government is intent upon keeping the truth about the adverse reactions about this from the people and trying to minimize the legitimacy of the VAERS reporting system, and even going so far as to ignoring people who did comply, did go and get the jab, did listen to what Fauci and the others said, and now they're left with a lifetime of adverse reactions and debilitating diseases because of what happened from the mRNA shot, and they're being ignored, and they're even being told by doctors that they're crazy.
I mean,
So this is
you had state medical boards threatening to take the licenses away from physicians who wanted to prescribe ivermectin. Now, the
yeah.
whole notion of a license, such as an attorney, such as a physician, an accountant, things of that nature, is the fact that you showed enough expertise in the subject matter in the field, and then you took an oath and you had a character investigation to ensure that you were doing what was in the best interest of your client, patient, whatever it may be, to exercise discretion and judgment. So when you are usurping the function of one's ability to independently assess and prescribe a medication, what is the point of being a doctor if the doctors don't have the
are
ability to make
controlled by the
assertion
government. Yeah.
or be licensed? So they were suppressing it. They intentionally pushed the narrative. And, I agree with the government. And I say that because I do think that there's a big problem with the VAERS reporting system. And it's not based on the fact that the results are erroneous. It's that they're so far under-inclusive.
Yeah.
Because it takes 30, 45 minutes to input all the information requested to adequately and properly report a VAERS event. And it doesn't even matter what the subjectivity is as to whether a doctor or nurse or whomever is filling out the VAERS report believes it was related to a vaccine injury. It's objective. Was a vaccine administered within the last 72 hours? Yes or no? Was there an adverse event? Yes or no? Whether you think they're related doesn't matter. You can't prove it yet because it's so early on in that, you need toxicology reports, things like that. But people weren't reporting them because of their own opinions, so effectively willingly violating law. And secondly, it's cumbersome and burdensome. And when you have hospitals that are overran, then, the hospitals are full. No one wants to work and you get free handouts. So they're understaffed and they're terrified because of being told that this virus is effectively like airborne AIDS. If you contract it, you're going to die, which is so far from the truth.
Right.
And that's what happens. I mean, it's underreported. It has never worked. They have known it was never going to work. And they know that the government needs to rely on big pharma to maintain its functional operations because they do put out life-saving drugs. There are drugs that are produced that people legitimately need. However, if you go after them and criminally prosecute it, they will have their licensing revoked. They will not be able to produce drugs that the government itself needs. So you'd be cutting off your head to spare your ear in that regard. And it's the same thing that happened last time with the multi-billion-dollar settlement against Pfizer for doing the same thing, putting a drug on the market they knew was dangerous, and they concealed it. All you do is settle. And as long as the settlement payout with the DOJ is less than the profit that was brought in, it's a functioning business model under the premises of what I explained earlier. It's just void of any sense of a moral or ethical duty to fellow man on earth. And it's just vile to see the magnitude of how big this is. And it's so hard for people to wrap their head around what's truly going on.
Well, and it exposes the fact that the FDA is really not truly in the best interest of the people. Can you even trust what that FDA label stands for at this point, right? I mean, this is what has so many people are waking up to is, wait a second, I thought if the FDA approves something, then that means it's because it's totally safe for consumption. It's totally safe for us. And we're learning every day that's not necessarily the case, that so many people on the FDA, are also former pharmaceutical executives.
Yeah, in the FDA, you have to get FDA approval before a drug can hit the market. Makes sense. Well, you can't patent natural remedies. You can't patent something that was made by nature. Patents only apply to something that's man-made. So by virtue of not being able to patent something, it takes out any profitability of it, because anybody can copy it, replicate it. It's not natural. It's not specifically unique to an inventor. And the FDA approval process costs tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. So if you can't profit from pushing holistic or natural medications or things that are on the earth that are good for you, then the only thing that's left is things that are patented. So what do? You make things. And if you want to profit them, well, make a need for them. What better business model? Again, when I say better, I'm talking about financial exclusively. I'm not speaking in sense of ethically, but what better business model than having an unlimited resource product paid for by unlimited funds that are taken from citizens by and through the government. And then the demand is virtually everyone, because they make you do it. And if you want it, you just create an issue that people need it. It's
absolutely disgusting.
Controlled. And no one will believe it because it's so heinous that the truth is scarier than fiction.
And I think that is the biggest thing that I've come up against with dealing with people, close to me who don't agree, right? Don't agree with this stance. And they're just like, I just can't believe that there would be people that evil in the world to do this. And you know what? I'll say this. When I woke up to realizing what was really going on, it was depressing for me too. It's definitely when you realize the gravity of what just happened, what we were just put through, it's horrendous what happened. But I'm so grateful for people like you who are willing to not only stand up and say, this is wrong, but you're going to actually do something about it and seek justice for American people. Where can everyone find you, Mike?
There's a lot of other lawyers doing this. It took me 9 minutes after Biden announced the vaccine mandate that I would sue him. And I will die on this hill. I will die on this soil fighting over what I truly believe in. And I'm not going to stop fighting unless God calls me home or Hillary Clinton finds me. But in terms of getting in contact, you can reach me at my website. It's yoderesq.com. That's yoderesq.com, and just fill out a contact form there, or find me on Twitter and Instagram. My Twitter account has now been reactivated after 2 years, which is nice.
Awesome.
And it's Yoder, YODER_ESQ. I'm a little shadow banned, so you might have to search a little bit to find me, but I'm on there, and I try to engage with as many DMs as I can.
Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us, and God bless you, and thank you for all you've done.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for joining us on this edition of Face the Facts. Again, if you're listening on podcast platform or watching on Rumble, you can click the link below to be able to contact Mike Yoder himself. Thanks again, and until next time, God bless.